that you have to bring them in. I think you're seducing the reader line by line by line, and the first one is the most important.
Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And it is episode 154 of the podcast, and it's April 24th, 2024. As we record this, there's a lot of fours in that line.
There's a
Today we're
lot. It's
talking
like this
about,
palindrome week. It's palindrome
yeah.
week. Like yeah.
Today we're talking about openings, first lines, and hooks for your book. We want to thank you to our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here in the podcast. Become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan for books, writing instruction, coaching, and planning, and patreon.com/Strange Air Stories for short stories in the paranormal mystery genre. Announcements. Pacific Northwest inspired horror stories, caretakerpress.org. Erick
There's a
is
lot of
starting.
stories in that queue.
There's a lot of
There's a
stories in
lot of
that
stories.
queue.
Please add to that queue if you're out there and you are sitting on a story. Please
Yep,
add it
submissions
to the
open until the
list.
stories are filled. They're going to start reading May 1st. So get it in there before May 1st if you possibly can. You can also go to valerieisan.com/retreat because the 2024 Writer Craft Writing Retreat and Workshop registration is open. And I have put out on the retreat page all of the workshop titles and blurbs. So I did a little bit of thinking about what I wanted to teach at the workshop at the retreat. So go have a look there. And my book, 3-Story Method, Writing How-To Books, is out now. And also, thank you, Erick, for lighting the fire. Focus and Finish, Goal Setting and Strategic Planning for Writers is now up on the stores, permafree. Actually, the
Oh my
Amazon one
gosh.
still says 99 cents. They
Right. It
haven't
always
picked it
says
up yet, but
yeah. Well, no, it'll say 99 cents, but then it'll have it. It's 99 cents, but in their metrics, it's 99 cents, but discounted. So
okay. Well,
yeah.
I might still have to like email them and be like, hey, can you price match? And then eventually it'll just say 0, I think. But yes, it should be up on all the sites.
That's terrific.
Those are the announcements. We don't have any listener comments or questions. If you guys have comments or questions, we love getting that mail. You can go to writercraftpodcast@gmail.com and pop in any questions or comments or leave a review on the podcast. We'll read those out. So yeah, we like to hear from you. It makes it more of a
We
conversation.
want to know what you're doing.
What are you doing? What's your author update?
Well, tomorrow I go to Colorado for the Pikes Peak Writers Conference, Jazz Up Your Writing.
Ooh.
Um, so yeah, it's a weekend conference. I'll be teaching something every day, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm kind of excited, and I love the idea of getting out of town. I love the idea of being in a big group of writers I've never been before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for that. But in and around that, I'm finishing Dead Still, which is the introductory novella for my new series, is up. It's in pre-sale form on Amazon. You can find it there for 99 cents. That's the pre-sale price. I am now like pretty close to finishing the rewrite of first, the second book, the first, longer full-length book. So that should be done here. Probably finish it over the weekend. So I'll be
Wait.
excited to
So
kick that out.
last week you said the revision of book 3 was happening, but
Book two.
you're saying book 2 is almost done, or was that book, did I write it down wrong
No,
last week?
book two. Yeah, I think book two revision is nearly finished. Um, and so yeah, I should be done with that over the weekend. And I think yeah, I think once I get home, I'll be planning the pre-release for that. So
Do you have
I'm
a
still
title for
working on a
that yet?
title for that one. I'm
Ah!
still working on the title. I don't know. I don't know. The titles are hard. Like I want to stay away from the like I want to stay away from the sort of branded title that I've done before. Everything has the word shadow in it. Not because I don't like. I think it's fun when you see a series that does those sort of things. What is it? M is for murder, N is for, whatever, like night or whatever that book series. It's kind of cool,
Hmm.
but it takes the joy out of discovering the title away.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. And
Hmm.
I liked coming dead still. I loved coming when I figured out that was the title. It was a eureka moment. Um, I love that feeling. So I'm not going to get that with this series. Um, I'm not going to get that with this series unless if I tie myself to a title logic. So yeah.
Usually my
Now that I have
titles, go ahead, sorry. Now that
no,
you
I was
have
going to say
what?
I want to be free. I want to be free of like rules around my titles.
Break free. I wanna break free. Okay, sorry.
I'm
Um,
testing out the title "The Accidental Stranger" because I like it. There's a
oh.
time travel element.
Hmm.
Um, the sort of ideas that the main character is a stranger in the new town he goes to, not just a stranger in like a new place, but in a new time.
Mm,
And
I dig
thus
that.
far, the time travel. You like the accidental stranger?
Yeah, I dig that. That's cool. I was gonna say the way I get my titles usually is after I write the book and I'm going through the I don't know, I look for a little phrase in the book that really pops out that has kind of a poetic tinge to it. And that
Right.
usually ends up being the titles for me. Um, yeah, I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, that's norm. So normally the title for me comes right off the like. I know immediately what the title is,
Mm,
and I
not
just,
me.
it's that simple, or it comes way at the end of the writing. Like it
Hmm.
comes somewhere like where I am now. So it's a familiar place to be. Um, I do this title brainstorm. Like I always have like a little notepad of just ideas like for things like that. And I wrote down The Accidental Stranger, and although I didn't commit to that title, I did it was hard to come up with other titles after that because I thought, well, this
That
is
one's got
pretty
edges
good
that snag on you. Yeah, you're like, oh, I like this one.
and there's no one on Amazon who has that title that I've seen. So I've searched the title out. I haven't seen it. So who knows? We'll see.
All right. Cool. How's your website design going? Have you been tweaking on it or is it
I'm
done?
building landing pages as we
Okay.
speak. I'm actually floating those to my designer today. That's one of my to-do things before I leave. And then hopefully, so like I'm making exclusive landing pages for ads. That's the way I think ads run the most effective, at least according to my digital marketer. So he's requested me to create some pages. So we're gonna do those pages now. We're gonna start testing those out probably next week. And then yeah, we're gonna be using the content from this conference throughout. Uh, yeah, we're going to be using the content from the conference throughout. We're going to record most of my seminars. We're going to be, putting them out there on social media. So I'm hoping to start doing more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
That sounds cool. You'll have
stay.
to, yeah, stay tuned. I want to know about that stuff and how to do it too. I see all these people
It's
doing like
coming.
reels, like clips from podcasts. I only just started doing teasers for our podcast, Eric. I'm so behind on all of the
I
fancy.
know.
And how do you get
Yeah.
like when I scrolling through Instagram, I don't have the sound on. I hate when like sound accidentally comes up because I'm usually like surreptitiously scrolling when I'm like waiting for something or bored in a class or something like that.
Right. Right.
So I love it when there's like little video clips that have like the closed captioning, but I don't
Right.
know how to like turn that on, or do you have to like write out the script and upload it with your video? Like, I don't know how to do that part. And and
Right.
how to streamline it. So that I think would be cool to put up a clip, like maybe even from our podcast like this when we're talking, and then
I
have that be on
I think
Instagram.
that's yeah. That's exactly when you say that, I'm like, that's the special sauce to me that I don't know how to do. Um, I wouldn't even know what to identify in. That's one of the things my digital marketing person has
Hmm.
said. Like, I'm gonna take each of those hours of video and I'm gonna identify what, what's really what's the best, um, what's the best stuff you do
Hmm.
in
What
there. I'm like,
clips?
I don't even know
Yeah.
what that is. I don't even know what that is. I'm gonna talk for an hour. I'm not gonna know anything about what the best stuff is, to be truthful. So I'm gonna be up there talking, and people are gonna be hopefully listening. And I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how it works.
Well,
I think it's I truly think that it's one of those, like, this digital marketing stuff. It's just gonna be one of those things that, for me, this is my sense of it. I'm going to come across the other side in 3 months after having somebody doing this, and I'm going to see how it works, and I'm going to say, "Oh, okay." Like, I think there's going to be a eureka moment, because for right now, it's all very vague. Like you said, like, how do I make this real? How do I put the captions on it? How do I make sure I pick the right stuff? Where do I put it? I mean, it's all, I'm sure the
it's going
mystery
to
is
be
not that
you're
hard.
going to have a system. He's going to set you up and he's going to tell you how to do it, and you'll have a checklist, and then you'll know how to do
Yep.
it. Or maybe you'll
Yep.
just
Yep.
have him do it. Whatever. Maybe you'll try it a few times and think, not worth my time. I'll pay
I
someone else to do
truly,
it.
I told him, like, our goal is, if we're making money here, if you're making me money, then I will continue to I'll continue to pay you to make me money. That should be the way this works. So he has an
Hmm.
incentive. And I said, there's a lot more where this came from. Like, I have many ideas, many projects, many things. So let's build it. Let's
Hmm.
build it.
Build it and they will come. That makes me
Yeah.
want to watch that movie again.
I love that movie. I have to stop myself from watching that movie.
Well, I got a new printer. Yay!
That's great.
And you got a new computer.
That's
Yay!
yeah. New computer, new printer,
I
new
printed out all
tech.
the things finally. So I had like 2 contracts that I was supposed to sign like months ago. So I finally
Oh
printed off the
gosh.
contracts, and then I can sign them and mail them back. And I published a book, that permafree book. That's going to be first in series. So book 2 is actually already half written, just with repurposed content, speaking of which. So so that one is going to be, the working title for that is Strategies for Authors. But that's, boring. I'll
Cool.
come up with something a little bit different. I mean, the boring
No,
part
that's
I
not
think
boring.
should be in the subtitle, because it's got to be SEO friendly, right? But the actual title,
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
it to be a little more pithy, or
Yeah.
more, not poetic, but just something more interesting than
You mean it
Strategies
has to be
for
like a first
Authors.
line? It has to be kind of like a hook. It's got to have a hook.
Yeah, I kind of like
Yeah.
that. More on that later.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
Absolutely. Still working on the Institute.
Okay. I
It's a great book.
finished I finished
You finished. What did you
Worthy.
finish?
I finished Worthy. I finished
Oh,
Dead Still. I'm working on the beta read right now. I'm only like a quarter of the way through. It's a really, 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 really long book.
hmm.
So I will be probably chipping away at that a little bit. And in the meantime, I think I've picked up Thunder Songs by Sasha LaPointe. She wrote Red Paint. She's the native writer
Hmm.
from Washington
Hmm.
State. She's a poet and she has a book of poetry out that I did not purchase, but I like essays. So Thunder Songs is her personal essays, and of course I love memoir. So Red Paint was a fabulous memoir. So if you're looking for a memoir read and you've already
That's the
finished
one.
mine,
Start.
then go with
Start.
Sasha LaPointe's Red Paint. So yeah, I'm Thunder Songs. That's the book that I'm reading now.
Cool.
Thunder Songs. I'll have links to all these in the show notes as ever. All right. Well, We should talk about first lines and hooks and beginnings, openings. There's
Let's define broadly too. When we talk about
okay.
first lines, I think you talk about first lines in a book. I mean, that's sort of the classic. If you read Poets and Writers magazine, um, there's a little there's always a little section of first lines of new releases.
Mm-hmm.
So first lines are classic, people remember them. But I also think there's something to be said for first lines to chapters, first lines to scenes. They are in they are no less important than the first line to the book, because that first line is the reader is picking up the book and saying, am I going to read this book? Let's see. Oh, that's first line's great. I'm hooked. But now in this world where we're competing as authors, we're competing with movies and Netflix and what's on the phone and doom scrolling and the news and all these things. You have to entice that reader to keep picking the book up, right? So
Yeah.
they read the first two chapters, they love it. That first line of that next chapter has to be great, because I think you're always rehooking the reader from their other distractions. So I think the principles apply throughout the manuscript.
Also, first lines in scenes are really important, just logistic wise. So often you're reading a book with multiple POVs, and that is the opportunity at the beginning of the chapter, or even arguably the beginning of a scene, if you're hopping around in your chapter with different POVs, to really clearly state, whose head you're in when you're reading,
Right. Right.
usually by the name or like the thing they're doing in that first sentence, so that the reader can clearly land in the scene and know exactly who they're reading about right now.
Right. Where
Otherwise,
they are, what they're
yeah, it's
doing. Yeah.
so annoying to me to like be reading and think I'm in character A's head, and then like even 3 sentences in I find out it's somebody else. I'm like, it really stops me. I have to like pause, rewind, reread, it's like the old VCR, like, what? What's going on
And
here?
every time you ask the reader to do that, you risk losing them, because readers don't want to have to do the work.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
and it
they
totally
don't want to have to
brings
work
you
to
out of
figure
the
it out.
story. I want
Right.
to be immersed.
Yeah. And it's a challenge. I mean, it's really a challenge to, and also I think another thing is, in a manuscript of any length, let's say it's even a 3 scene short story, I think you have to vary your introduction, your opening lines, so that you're not, kind of strumming the same beat every time. I find that when I read, either as a writer, as a part of my reading group, my writers group, or I'm reading as part of something I'm editing for a client, one of the things I'll return to is this idea that, like, give me different openings. You can't always open with a description of the sunset, or you can't always open on cold dialogue, or you can't always open, you know, with a sort of poetic line, so sort of a la classic literature. You have to vary those approaches, and watch a movie. You watch a movie, like every time a scene opens, it doesn't always open the same way.
Is it
So
just
you
to
have
prevent
to have.
boredom? Is that
I
why?
think it's to. I think so, and I also think there's an element of expectation, that you're trying to subvert expectations all the time, right? If the first scene begins with a description of the sunset and it ends with a car door slamming, um, you've given the reader some finality to that scene. Car door slam sounds like the end of something. You want to open
Mm,
with a variation, with a variation of a scene opening. Sorry, a version of a scene opening that, signals to them we've moved on, we're in a different place, and
hmm.
to keep them interested. Because if you keep repeating those beats, it gets really tedious and really boring, and it starts to feel like the writer. I think when I read manuscripts for
Mm.
people, I'm like, this sounds like the writer is like, doesn't know what to do here. um
So
that's why I was.
repetitiveness, yeah. If it becomes repetitive, it becomes boring. The reader loses interest and or breaks them out of the storyline because you think, oh, this is author intrusion.
Yeah, and I think there's the temptation to like consider that like motif, like, oh, this is just what I do. Everything opens with the sunset, or it
Mhm.
might be, if you're writing some, I don't know, environmental sci-fi, that changing sunset is part of the story and the reader will be clued into that, or it might be, I don't know, I think of things that like people where people try to just create some stylistic elements that are uniquely there, and that might work, but you have to be very purposeful and intentional about that, or there's a big difference. There's a small difference between like it working and really not working. So you have to be careful. I think there's a finer line than most people think, to be honest.
Hmm. Well, I
I
have
think it's just,
questions about that, but now I wonder if this is the right place for it.
well, no, I think it is.
Just you know, that line between the stylistic element working and totally not working, like where I guess for me that would just be the repetitiveness, or like if you're trying for symbolism, like the heavy hitting over, I said that totally wrong. Hitting them over the head with the symbolism, like if
right,
you're putting it in the first line of every chapter, like that's
right.
maybe not where to put it in, and maybe that's too often anyway.
Well, I'm gonna quote an editor that I had a while ago who worked on a book of mine, and she said, "Why do you keep bringing up these?" I'm talking about you. If anybody didn't figure that out, I mean, I was really big on putting, and this isn't exactly what I mean, but I had like a time. I would timestamp the beginning of chapters to keep the reader oriented to the beat, like where we were in the
Oh, I
story.
remember this.
And yeah, and you said like it really takes me out of the story because I keep thinking this is like a landmark time, and it really matters, and I realize like, oh, this is like, I look at this like kind of like a true crime story where you see the date kind of on the bottom of the screen, but it doesn't work for everybody that way. I just think you might you I it was a very fine line. Like to me, I thought it mattered, and I thought it worked, and you said it didn't. It took you out. So I think those are the kind of things that like it just didn't work. There's a fine line. Now I timestamp things that are like landmark dates in a story, or a landmark dates in a manuscript, um, that are
I think it
important to show.
works too if you just put, like, if you're trying to, especially if you're working with two different timelines. Like,
Yes,
if you're reading two different timelines, then the year makes a lot of sense to me, or
right,
like the
right,
season, fall or whatever.
right,
But if it
right,
has a specific date to it, then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Is this, because the time is jumping around. So then I have to, like, in a paper book, I would actually flip back to the last time I saw a date to see if time has passed, or if it's, before then, or, and when I'm just reading it digitally, I can't easily do that. So then I am perpetually kind of like wondering until I'm further in to the chapter, where is this and who is this? And again, like that pulls
right.
me out of the story. So I don't think that it's a bad idea in totality. Like I just the date part, like May
Yeah,
15th, 1972. What's the deal with May 15th, 1972? Can it just be May 1972? I
right,
think that was
right.
my point.
And I think where I go with this is that I feel like that's the fine line. Like for me as a reader, like I love the date and time stuff. I really do. Like it's one of my, it gives me that level of reality. It always feels to me like it makes the story feel like it's really like real. It didn't work for you. You
Sorry.
signaled to me, hey, I like time. I like the time stuff when it's important. So it forced me to make to make a different choice, or disregard what you were saying. And that's every writer's
Yeah.
right. You can always disregard what your editor says. I worked with someone who was writing an environmental sci-fi. It was right around the time of the wildfires here in the Pacific Northwest, and she opened every chapter with some like kind of weather report. It almost felt like the weather report. and it lost steam. And I think it really, the book was great, but this opening lost steam. And I don't think and she didn't know. And that's what she came to me for, to learn, does this work or not? So that's what I meant. Like, there's a fine line. Like, for her, it worked for the first 3 or 4 chapters, and after that, it just didn't work anymore.
Monotonous, yeah.
Yeah, it just got really. You're hooking the reader. That's the thing we have to remember, is we're hooking the reader into the story. And if you look at the classic stories, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times. I mean, we don't live in that world anymore where that book is hundreds of years old, but that's a classic line. People remember that line, like the first line of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Like, they're poetic lines, and maybe that's not what we do anymore, but that you have to bring them in. I think you're seducing the reader line by line by line, and the first one is the most important.
Sometimes readers are going to put the book down if you can't hook them right away. And so that's why, of course, we're talking about this. This is why it's important. And
right.
And if it falls, basically, if you can't have a good beginning, if you can't hook the reader right away, then they're not going to read the book. And you can't win them. Like, sometimes people will be like, well, the book really picks up, a third of the way in, and then it's like dynamite awesome. Well, then start your book there. Like,
right.
Don't hope that the reader will just plod through the beginning so they can get to the good part. Like, make the beginning the good part, so that even if the middle is kind of saggy, and there's so many things that can make a good hooky opening for me. Some things, sometimes it doesn't have to be a first line. I love a good first line, or at least a good first paragraph. But if that doesn't happen, other things that can hook me are the setting. So, like, if it's a cool historical setting that I like, or a place in the world where I've not been and I'm interested in, or if it's about a group of people, a community of people that interests me that I don't know a lot about, like, I don't know, for a while I had like this Amish thing. Jodi Picoult wrote a book called Plain Truth that I really loved, and it took place in an Amish community. And that was part of the reason why I bought the book, because I was like, ooh, this sounds interesting. I don't know a lot about the Amish. I like that. Or I've picked up books because of theme. I think that can be a hook too. If you read the back of the book description, and it says, covering themes on blah, 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 and I'm interested in one of those themes, then I'll, buy the book. I consider those hooks too. Not necessarily are going to be in the first paragraph, but they're going to be the first chapter. And I guess you want to make sure that they are.
Right. I think I've when we came up with this topic, I started thinking about like what the different ways to hook readers. And I think there's narrative voice. Like, if you have a unique, like 100% unique narrative voice for your character, that you want to start with that. I always think the first line to Lolita by Nabokov, Humbert, the POV character in that story, Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. It's like, I'm reading, I'm here. Like,
what's this?
I'm in this character. Yeah, I'm here. And like, so if you have this powerful narrative voice, to me, that's great. And you should be leading with that, because that's what's going to carry that reader through. You actually said something a minute ago about, like, when people say the book really starts here, well, that person isn't going to get there without something. They were hooked by something. It may have been the narrative voice. I also think you can introduce the whole theme of the story in that first line. Like,
those best times, those the worst of times.
Yeah. Or, I think of the beginning of Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, where it's something about happy families are all alike. And I'm like, that's an interesting line. Happy families are all alike. It's a hook. Um, but I think where we're, if you're in the genres, it's usually something like, um, it's something odd or curious, right? And I'm trying to pull these from memory, but I think 1984 by George Orwell opens with clock striking 13. Like odd or curious, like clocks don't,
Hmm.
clocks don't strike 13. So I think there's like different, you can't do that in every paragraph, or you can't do that in every scene with something curious like that.
I think it would be
But when you're talking
exhausting
about,
if it would.
it would be exhausting. It'd be
Yeah.
so
The
exhausting.
pacing would be
The
totally
Hobbit,
weird.
my 9-year-old son could probably like paraphrase the opening of The Hobbit, because it just sets that whole like, the hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, and it's this nasty, no, it's not a nasty hole, that kind of thing. Like,
Uh-huh.
so I think Stephen King, who everybody knows is my guiding light, he says like that first lines are invitations. You're
Mm.
trying to tell the reader that like you want to see what's inside here, and and whatever you have that. But that also, I think we should shift somewhat and say, well, how do you know what you're inviting people to? Like, is it what kind of party is your book? Is it a costume party? Is it a, like, what is the party of the book you're inviting people to? I think you have to know. I used to know a writer who would write first lines, just like
Hmm.
write down like hooky first lines. And I thought that was really cool for a while. And then I realized, but like, what good is this first line if I don't know the rest of the story? It has to connect something. Um, right? It has to,
Yeah.
I
What?
knew it has to pay off. Like, and Toni Morrison has a first line that says, I think it says, they shoot the white girl first. Like, that book had better pay that off. That story had better pay that off, because that is a huge emotionally packed line. So I don't know. I think the hooks are great, but if there's nothing behind it, you run into trouble. Whole nother topic, I know, but
Yeah, whole other topic. Other things opening wise that I think need to be in
mm,
there are the protagonist needs and wants. And let me
yeah,
put in a caveat there. So, opening in this case means the beginning, I guess, of the book to me in this one sentence, in this one example, because by the end of the chapter, for sure, I need to know who that main character is, why I want to be on a journey with him, and what he's going to go and do. Like, what is it that he
right.
wants? What is he striving for? Because I need to know if I can get
Or she,
behind whatever
or
that
she,
is. Yeah. Or they. So,
yeah,
whatever it is that they're striving for, I also need to be willing to go on this journey and strive for that too. I want to be able to root for the main character. So, that has to
right,
happen at the beginning of the book too.
right,
I'm
right.
looking at the rubric right now, and there's a section in the rubric on beginnings and endings that I added, and an excellent beginning says that this hook creates an impact on the reader. It stirs up their interest, raises anticipation, questions, and curiosity. Readers have a compulsion to get into the book, and the reader is driven to follow the character and see if they get what they want and need. Direct quote from the rubric. So
Got
those
it.
are all part of openings, beginnings, something that's going to hook your reader.
Yep, yep. And I think it's important to, I think it's important, because we talk about process. Like, I think it's important to be aware of this, but also aware that you might not have the hooky first lines, or you might be working on these elements later in the book than right away. Like, if you're sitting at the computer agonizing over a first line, and the next 40,000 words are simmering on the stove, but you're stuck, you're kind of like trying to figure out that first line. The idea of doing everything chronologically, or being kind of a slave to yeah, being a slave to chronology, it can get in the way. Like, if you know the rest of the book, by all means, go write the rest of the book.
Yeah, this is a revision
understate.
thing, you know.
Yeah, you may have that first line, right? I mean, you may have that shocking, funny, you know, great "Call Me Ishmael" Moby Dick first line that sets the tone, and
Uh-huh.
that's great. You may have that, but if you don't, but you have 30,000 other lines, write those 30,000 other lines first. Get there.
Absolutely.
It's I always think of that just like that sort of myth of the agonizing artist, the agonizing writer who's like trying to create the perfect line of poetry out of thin air. Like sometimes, like we were talking about with titles, that great line, that great moment, that great hook comes later.
It does. It does for
Yeah.
me anyway. I don't ever have the first line. That is definitely a revision thing for me. And I don't
Yeah.
have a little, I don't have, I used to have a little notes app thing that had a collection of first lines. I don't know whatever happened to that. But yeah,
I
every once in a while one will just sort of like drop in like a I don't know, divine download or something like, oh, this is a great first line, and I'll write it down. But I've yet to actually use any of those.
and I think it's also when you talk about having like sort of I don't know, I kind of think of it just like I have a bucket or I have a container. I have something that I put these ideas in. It's like sometimes it's like practicing a sport. Like if you are a basketball player and you practice 6 days out of the week taking shots in the front yard, you might have you can't look at those shots you're taking in practice as waste.
Mm-hmm.
So you could maybe write a bunch of first lines and none of those end up anything, but it's priming the mechanism in your brain that gets you thinking in the writers, especially if it's like a voice based first line, right? Or a voice based manuscript. I think about how much, I mean, Nabokov's such a weird example because of just who he was, but getting to that Humbert Humbert voice that makes Lolita one of the most will never go out of relevance. He probably had to work on that voice tirelessly to get that down, to really get that distilled line. I think it so
My favorite
don't
narrative voice that really hooked me into, I mean, I like a lot of books for their narrative voice, but the one that keeps popping back in my head is Motherless Brooklyn by Jonathan Lethem. The
oh
main
yeah.
character has Tourette's. So the first paragraph is just basically his voice telling you what it's like to have a tic that you're trying to subdue and how it just like explodes out. And that was so freaking fascinating to me. And I
Yeah.
thought it was written so
Yeah.
well that that was what pulled me through the rest of the book, which was just, kind of a generic mystery. Who killed this
Right.
dude? But
Right.
the narrative voice was so compelling. I've read that book like 3 times just for the voice. I really liked it. Other
And for
first,
me,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say for me, I've probably read The Catcher in the Rye like I don't know 5 times in my life, and it's always the voice. I mean, Holden Caulfield, that voice is just amazing. And that first line, if you really want to hear about it, I'm reading this. I'm not, this is not from memory, but he says, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. Like, all right, I'm here. I just read that and I like my legs got like the hair raised on my neck
Yeah.
and my back. Like I'm like I
Uh-huh.
could go read this right now. Um,
I
yeah,
also really liked, speaking of like a setting opening, Shantaram. Have you read that book?
no,
David Roberts, forgot it's a three name. There's David and
Gregory
there's
David
Roberts.
Roberts.
What is it?
Gregory David Roberts.
Yes, there we go. Um,
I'm reading that also. I didn't know that off the top of my head.
but Shantram opens like the first paragraph or two is all about setting in Bombay and like landing at the airport and walking out into India and Bombay, and the smells. I mean, he did such a brilliant job of setting the stage in terms of setting, like the world building, like I could smell in that first chapter, in that first page, I mean, what it smelled like and that's not a sense that usually I get a lot of from writing, because we are such a visual group of people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, humans are visual. Yep.
So it was great. If you like India and you like epic long tales, it's a big doorstopper of a book, but it's got great characters, and I recommend it.
And I mean, I know that I've read the first of the Master and Commander books. Those, like, people love that stuff because it's so technical. That book kind of opens with a very, when you talked about like introduction by setting, like you were in the first paragraph of that book, you are in a seaport in the time. You could smell it, taste it, feel it. It was all right there. It's not even my favorite kind of writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just like, you cannot, I challenge you not to get immersed into that. I challenge you. It's not possible to resist it. It's too powerful. It's a constant conversation in my writers group because, you know, the transition is, and this is a whole nother topic, and maybe we shouldn't even go much further than this, but like transitions are the same things. Like you're transitioning from scene to scene, and it's another opening line, it's another hook, it's another introduction of setting. We talked about this. Like you're constantly having to do this. You're constantly having to, um, you're re-invite your reader in, because
Mm-hmm.
count how many times you pick up your book. Like I
Yeah.
probably have picked up the Institute 10 times, and I have to be reintroduced to it. I have to be like re-engaged in it. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point. And I also like we didn't mention this, or maybe we did, but the story as a promise. When you're opening up the book and you're starting to read those first few lines, you are, like you said, getting to know, like, what party are you being invited to? Like, what are you promising the
Right.
reader? What is coming up? And
Right.
being able
Right.
to um they also have a couple of I don't know, technique. I don't know if that's the right word, but I like the kinds of openings where they start really broad and then narrow the focus of the camera into, like, this person, like you're
Oh,
in a
yeah.
town, you're on a street, you're in a house, you're in a yard, you're in you know what I mean? That telescoping, or reverse telescoping, I guess, as an opening technique, I like. And I
Right.
also have heard about being able to, like, however it is that you start your book, also ending your book kind of in the same way, like sort of a mirror
Mm.
image, or like a bookend,
Mm.
that gives the
Yeah.
reader, satisfaction. I don't know if that could be true for every type of book, but those are also.
Well, I think I mean, that gets into cinema. That's a very cinematic
Mhm.
sort of element of that. Like the opening image and closing image should, one should resolve the other. Um, right. If the first image is of like of a wrecked city and a young girl crawling out of the muck, then you're resolving the idea of this is the, so whatever that opening, that if that's your opening, your ending should resolve, her role in that city itself, whatever that element is that you're trying to, whatever the story journey. Um, yeah.
All
Now we're getting
right.
into screenplays,
Yeah.
which I'm fine with, but yeah,
Well, our listeners could be writing screenplays, so it's always good to
they
touch on
could.
that too. But
Hopefully
all
they
right,
are.
I think we've said everything that we have to say about
Yeah.
first lines, openings, and hooks. And if you've got any other tips for us, you can drop those in the Facebook group, or comment on this podcast episode. and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me this week, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Bye for
Talk to you
now.
soon.